Hi, folks, and welcome to White Collar Week. It's the isolation that destroys us. The solution is in community. Many of our friends and colleagues in the white-collar justice community tell me that they are writing books about their experiences, or that someone should make a movie about them, even me. So I contacted a few professionals I know in the movie and television production business and asked them what it takes to actually get the attention of a movie or TV series producer or director. And each of them were happy to come on the podcast to discuss it. We are calling this episode, Is Your Life a Movie? Joining us are Lydia B. Smith, Bethany Jones, and Will Nix, three movie and television producers who actually made justice-related films or TV shows. And they each provide their contact information for you to get in touch with them. So coming up, Is Your Life a Movie? The producers on White Collar Week. I hope you will join us. Hello, and welcome to White Collar Week, a podcast sponsored by Progressive Prison Ministries, the world's first ministry serving the white-collar justice community. I'm Jeff Grant, co-founder and your host. I served almost 14 months in a federal prison for a white-collar crime I committed when I was a lawyer, so I know that it's the isolation that kills us, and the solution is in community. So let's get started. Hi, folks, and welcome to White Collar Week. We have a very special podcast today. We're calling the producers, but really what we have are producers and directors and film industry and TV industry professionals, all of whom are friends of mine and all of whom have produced different forms of media around criminal justice or justice themes. So the big question that I hear from everybody when they go through prison or they come through the criminal justice system is why don't they make a movie about me? Or how do I get a movie made about me? Or I want to write a book. And these three are really curators of how that happens, at least each in their own world. And they're going to tell us what it takes to make a movie, what interests them, what interests the audience. Is it a surprise? Is there a formula? So they have all kinds of industry background. So what we're going to do is go around. Each of them is going to introduce themselves for 4 or 5 minutes, then we'll get into conversation. And with us today, we have Lydia Smith, Will Nix, and Bethany Jones. And very happy to have all three of you with us today. Why don't we start with Lydia, then Bethany, and then Will, and introduce yourselves, and we'll take it from there.
Okay. Well, hi, everybody, and thanks for having me, Jeff. So my background really started in college. I was in a documentary class, and there was a woman that came in to show a film on incest and child sexual abuse. And despite it being literally the worst subject in the world, it was actually one of the most inspiring, uplifting films I'd ever seen. And so I asked her if I could work for her, and I did an internship. Then she hired me out of college. And the motivation behind that was I saw how one film could change millions of lives, because her film was called Breaking Silence. And it was really about breaking the cycle of incest and child sexual abuse, because most women that were abused sexually end up marrying or hooking up with a man that will then abuse their children if they don't break the cycle. And so I saw how powerful film was as an agent to uplift and inspire people. And so my career kind of went all over the place. I worked for several different documentary filmmakers back in the Bay Area. Then I moved to Spain for approximately 6 years, worked in commercials mostly. Then moved to LA, and I moved into the camera department. I was mostly in production before that, and was able to work in the camera department on a lot of big movies like Ed Wood and Matilda and Dangerous Minds. But all the while, my true love was always documentaries and kind of social issue or things that would really have a positive impact in the world. And so I worked on usually about one documentary every couple of years. A couple of the standouts was on the for CNN Presents. It was on the children's peace movement in Colombia. It was called Soldiers of Peace, a children's crusade. Another one I worked on was called Stand Up, which was a comedy camp at the Laugh Factory in Hollywood. And they would bring kids from disadvantaged situations, foster homes or group homes. And to be honest, I never really felt like I could make a film. Like, I was a really great producer. I was a really great camera person, but I guess I just didn't believe in my own potential. I'm not really sure, or it just felt too overwhelming. But I did do one short film on my own called They're Just Kids, which was about friendships between kids with special needs and typical kids. But it was a kind of a short movie, and it didn't go too far. But then what happened for me is I went and walked the Camino de Santiago, which is a 500-mile pilgrimage in northern Spain, where you literally walk across a country. And as I was walking and people found out I was a filmmaker, they were like, "Oh, you should do a documentary on the Camino." And I was like, no. It's, I did a short film before. It's too much work. It's too hard. But that little voice kept niggling at me. So when I got home, I just couldn't stop thinking about it. And so I ended up doing a documentary on the Camino. Took me 5+ years to make it. And it did really well. We were the number 12 doc in theaters in 2014 in the US, and then number 5 in Australia and New Zealand in 2015. And had a really good broadcast on PBS, and have a Rotten Tomatoes review of 90%. So I've been really pleased with how that went. And what I realized is what really inspires me the most or interests me the most is transformation, is people changing. Like, what makes people change? How do they change? And when I say change, I really do mean transform, because change is something that you can change and then change back. But transformation is a permanent change. And that's what really interests me. And after I finished walking the Camino, there were a couple other films that sort of came and went and didn't get funding, or, didn't happen. And I was just sort of in transition. And a friend of mine teaches theater at a prison. And he had a performance of a play about solitary confinement called The Bucket. And so I went to go support my friend. I mean, I, didn't really have any particular interest in going to prison. I mean, I'd been to prison once before with Soldiers of Peace. And it was kind of a youth facility, and it wasn't a maximum security prison. And it was a really interesting experience now that I look back on it, because at first I was like, oh, no big deal. I'm going into prison. And then they read you the Riot Act, which is, I mean, I'm sure most listeners know this, but which is literally, if there's a riot, you're on your own. So all of a sudden I was just like, oh my God, and just in my head, outwardly, I seemed pretty calm, but I just was like kind of scanning who's going to hurt me, who's going to help me. And we went up to where the performance was going to be, and my friend took off. I was the only woman. There was only 5 of us from the outside, and I was the only woman. And all these prisoners are milling about. There's like 30 prisoners or adults in custody. And anyway, my friend said, oh, here, talk to Terrence. And I started talking to Terrence. I'm like, okay, he's, if there was a riot, he'd hide me in the broom closet. And then the play happened. And again, at this point, there's like 50 prisoners, and the play is happening, no guards in sight. And I was just blown away. It was an incredible play. It was a series of monologues. It ended up winning the first prize in the Penn Awards, Prison Penn Awards. And afterwards, there was one particular performer that just blew me away. I mean, it was like spoken word poetry. His performance was just amazing. And afterwards, I started talking to him, And all of a sudden, my whole body relaxed. And I was like, I'm safe now. And I just knew that I knew that I knew that this man would put his life down for me if anybody tried to hurt me or if anything happened. And I was like, wow, how interesting is that? The safest I've probably ever felt is with a man that's in prison. Like, this guy just exuded this. And so anyway, it was just an extraordinary experience. And there was a guy there that was planning on doing a documentary about the theater program. And I said, I'm in. It was just an intuitive, and what I want to bring, and my film is still in production. It's called Blooming Where Planted, a hope and humanity, a search for hope and humanity behind bars. And it's really about the transformation of a group of prisoners. And then there's this one that's kind of the leader of the restorative justice program, and who's quite extraordinary as a real poet and very eloquent. And what I saw was the switch that I had from, one, not caring about guys behind bars, kind of having this like attitude of like, well, they're getting what they deserve. I just didn't think much about it, but I think that's what I thought. And then as I went and saw this play and saw these extraordinary men doing this performance and bearing their souls, and I was so moved by them. And I just realized I wanted to make a film that could kind of help viewers have the same transition I did, to view people on the inside. Like, there's a huge range of people. There's extraordinarily talented, wonderful, inspiring people, as much as there's guys that probably shouldn't leave ever. But I just never thought about the guys. I mean, most media really focuses on the dangerous and the evil and the Hannibal Lecters of the world. And so I wanted to do something different and really show the transition, the transformation that can happen inside. And so we started production in January, and then we got shut down with COVID in March. But one of our lead characters is going through some legal things. So we're kind of following his legal proceedings, and I've been doing Zoom interviews, but we're still in the process. And what's the most interesting is how much I miss the guys, because I used to go there every week, and it's just, there's something really fulfilling about being around a group of men that are so dedicated to their transformation and to being better people.
Thank you, Lydia. That was beautiful. So, Bethany, you have a lot of experience dealing with the criminal justice system and putting it on camera. So, why don't you give us some background?
I do. Thank you so much. So, I was born and raised in the UK and France. I'm a dually, meaning I'm half British, half American. Got both passports. And I went to the University of Wales, and I thought that I wanted to be a journalist and do print journalism for Vogue, Vanity Fair. I wanted to do big human interest pieces. And I'd come back to Los Angeles, where my family was at the time, for the holidays. And I ran into an old high school teacher, and she said, my son's working on this show called Prison Break. I didn't know anything about it. And she said, I think you'd be really good in TV. And I was like, I kind of want to be a writer and for journalism. I want to go to grad school, do journalism. And she said, just write to my son, and maybe he can get you an internship. So I wrote to him. And I said, hi, my name's Bethany. I'm, 19 years old, 20 years old. Can I intern for you? And I didn't hear anything, no response. And I go back to Wales, and one day I'm sitting on a bus, and the rain is just torrential. It's bucketing down. And I see on my phone an LA number comes up, and I think it's got to be a friend from high school. And I answer the call, and the voice comes on and says, Bethany, this is Zach from 20th Century Fox. I'm so sorry it's taken me so long to get back to you. He said, I actually can offer you a full salaried position on Prison Break. And I was like, okay, all right. And he said, let's set a time to speak and we'll figure out the details. So I graduated from university on a Monday. I flew back to Los Angeles, and Tuesday at 8 a.m. I was on the Fox lot working on Prison Break. And I did research for the writers and producers, and I, researched a lot about South American, Central American prison systems and the prisons there. And then the recession and writer strike happened back to back. And I was, just working, making ends meet, doing film research. And a friend called me and she said, I can offer you a position for 6 weeks on a documentary. And I thought, oh my gosh, I'm going to be with like David Attenborough and penguins. I mean, it's a documentary, right? So I immediately took the job. And then I called her and I said, wait, what's the subject matter? And she said, it's about children that commit homicide. And I said, Dana, why would you think I'm good at this? And she said, you're a really good listener. And she said, when you reach out to people, that's what they want. They want a good listener. And 6 weeks turned into 2 months, turned into 3 months, turned into 6 months. And then 2 more Discovery shows picked me up. Then I did my first CNN series with the former head of the Intelligence Committee. And from there, it was just show after show after show. And on my first CNN series, we got this note back saying that they wanted to know who the confidential informant is for this case, this arms dealing case. So I was like, all right. And I wrote to Saddam Hussein's weapon supplier. And I was like, hey, who is your friend? Like, it was like, you're so far in production, you're tired, you're beat down, you're weary. And he wrote back and he was like, why aren't you doing my story? My story is much more interesting. By the way, here's like the guy. And so we ended up not needing the guy's name because obviously we can't put a confidential informant. But when all this transpired, one of my colleagues said, well, aren't you just the little inmate whisperer? And I started to think about that. And I started to really think about, what the justice system is, what the prison system is, what these institutions are and what they mean to us. And after that show, I went to conduct my first prison interview. And as I was walking in, there was this woman and she's just like chatting away and, real chatty Cathy talking about her husband, and she'd worked at USC. And it was kind of what I call a God moment, like where I knew I was doing the right thing and the interview was going to be good. Because I said, oh, that's funny. My grandpa worked at USC. He was a dean there. And she was like, well, who's your grandpa? And suddenly I was like, I don't want to tell you who my grandfather was. Like, that seems really personal. So I told her, it's Bob Jones. Like, he worked on Gilligan's Island and created the test for the DGA and the SATs. Like, he was a test maker. And she goes, Bob Jones? She said, in the math department? I said, yeah. She goes, he was the nicest man. And I'd never had that kind of intersection of my own world with this world collide like that. And it kind of took my breath away a little bit because I didn't know my grandfather growing up because he passed away when I was very young and I lived in the UK. And I went in, conducted this interview with a guy. He could have gone to my high school. You know, he could have been in class with me. And I started to wonder, are men and women who are touched by the justice system just like me? Do they have hopes and dreams like I do? Do they have, you know, goals, ambitions? And I realized that we're not that far apart. So, yeah. So that was kind of what launched me into the justice system and justice-related programming, which I've done for almost my entire career, if you include Prison Break. So, yeah.
Thanks, Bethany. I'm sure we'll get a chance to discuss some of your current projects too.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Will, I saved you for last, mostly because I've known you the longest. Will and I have been great friends for almost 20 years since we both lived in Greenwich. And then Will left us and moved to Tinseltown. So, Will, why don't you introduce yourself and give some background, because you've done a lot of things.
First of all, it's been fascinating to listen to Lydia and Bethany, and thank you for having me here today. It's my path, I guess, as it relates to prisons and the criminal justice system, is both somewhat more linear and structured, and not at the same time. I think in sort of reflecting in preparation for today, I sort of looked back and thought about where did I get into the path that I'm on right now. And I think one of the things was that I grew up in a suburb of Chicago, and the church I went to, the Methodist Church, was founded by John Wesley, who was an 18th century theologian, and service was very, very much part of embedded in that. And I think it probably is in all religions, but it was particularly in the forefront, service to the poor. And prison reform and the abolition of slavery were also very much in the forefront of the tenets of that religion. But I also grew up in a family where my mother was an English teacher, and literature and storytelling and whatever was imbued from us, practically from birth. And so I think I always related to reading great stories, short stories, novels, and as I got a little older, in movies and television programs, and just telling stories of one sort or another. And the ones that always resonated with me most were ones that had some message to them, had something that was more uplifting. I mean, I love a great Jason Bourne movie and sort of escapist type of things. I mean, I'm very eclectic that way, but the ones that I think really stick with me are the ones that do what we call putting the spinach in with the popcorn. That you have you enjoy it as entertainment, but you also there's more to it that you take away and that you remember over time. So fast forward a number of years, doing a lot of it. I was an English major, took a lot of film courses or whatever. When I graduated from college at Georgetown, I taught English and a little film course in the DC public schools, and I did that for several years. And then I pivoted and I went to work as a law clerk at the National Prison Project of the ACLU, which is probably my first experience in actually dealing with people who were incarcerated, and visited many different prisons and jails, because we were doing civil rights type cases, human rights type cases. So everything from dietary restrictions, the right of Muslims to wear their head caps, and also things like access to prison libraries and whatever as well. And so I went to both local jails and maximum prisons like Lewisburg, and near where I visited you, Jeff, as a matter of fact, over the years. So I came to understand some of what both Bethany and Lydia were talking about in terms of relating to the actual people in prisons and what their stories were, and we would bring civil rights lawsuits to try and basically protect the human rights of people in prison. So we weren't doing habeas corpus or other things like that, but we were, basic constitutional and human rights of people incarcerated. So having done that for several years, I went to law school. And in the course of law school, I learned that there's this thing called entertainment law, where I could marry my interest in storytelling with, the practice of law and actually earn a living doing it at the same time. And I thought, oh, eureka. And I did that for, the better part of 30 years. And I got to a point in time where I said, I can continue doing this. I was living, as you mentioned, comfortably in Greenwich, Connecticut, and had a very nice job at 30 Rockefeller Plaza. And, there was no reason from a comfort point of view not to just stick with that and kind of ride that through to retirement. But I decided I would sort of jump out of a plane without a parachute and become a producer. And that's what led to my moving west. So a lot of what I'm focused on now is really pretty much continuation of that line, but in a different way. I'm trying to work on storytelling that has an impact. So there are two sort of threads that I'm working on right now with the Producers Guild of America. With some colleagues, we formed a social impact entertainment task force. And we've been doing a whole series of different workshops and events for producers and writers and directors that sort of give them the tools and the platform to learn more about how to produce those kinds of movies. We just did one over the weekend where we had Norman and Lynn Lear, as well as Jeff Orlowski, who directed The Social Dilemma. And we were focused on climate change and storytelling about climate change. And the other group I'm involved with that we just launched at the end of August is called the Social Impact Entertainment Society, or the SIE Society, and you can find it at siesociety.org. Basically what we're trying to do is create a platform for people who are interested in that type of storytelling to come together, sort of break down silos and whatever, and kind of open up the dialogue, create a community for people to network with one another and learn, provide resources to each other and whatever. So that's kind of the trajectory I'm on right now. And certainly things like prison reform and the stories that are about prisons or prisoners, fit right into, right within the aperture of what we're focused upon.
Thank you. And just full disclosure, when after I got arrested and my ex-wife kicked me out, Will put me up in his house in Greenwich for about 6 months before he moved west. And for those of you who are homeless, Greenwich, Connecticut is a very good place to be if you need to find a sofa or a bed to camp out on for 6 months or so. And Will was very, very kind. And then Will and I and his chocolate lab got in his SUV and drove from Greenwich to Austin, Texas. And that's a whole story unto itself. In my mind, it's worthy of a movie, but I have no idea what that really means. So thank you all for your intros. So fascinating. So here's the topic, really. So for everyone that, who goes to prison, their information is really anecdotal, or their lives are touched by the criminal justice system. What makes something interesting to you? How does it touch you? How does something come to you? How does it resonate with you or not? How do you figure out if it's fundable? I can't even tell you how almost everybody, and I deal with hundreds and hundreds of people in the criminal justice system, everybody's got a book, everybody's got a movie. So I'm hoping to get a dialogue going between the three of you or the four of us to discuss what that really means and what captures your imagination enough to even take a meeting with someone. What do you need to see? Someone want to jump in there and take that?
I'll let Lydia and Will start because every show I've done is been funded by a network. Like I've never like had to get funding for a project. So I'll let them start with that.
Mm-hmm.
Lucky you, Bethany. I mean, I've worked on shows with, like CNN, et cetera, but it's not easy. I guess I'll say, I mean, for me, it's really kind of an intuitive thing. I mean, it's just something that hits me like, I need to do this. Like, I need to make a film about this. And I can't say, I mean, the funding part, it was extremely hard for me to fund my last film. It took, I ended up turning to private donors. And with this one, I thought, prison reform and, restorative justice and transformation of prisoners. I mean, there'll be lots of money, but it's extremely hard. Tribeca, we applied to Tribeca. They had 700 applicants for 4 spots. Mm. And then the IDA just had a focus on criminal justice films, and they had 200 applicants for 7 spots. And we didn't get either one of those. So I don't make films. I don't think about like what's fundable, because I think you have to be so passionate and so committed to what you're doing. And if you don't have that, if you're just looking at the money or what's going to be easily funded, I'm not sure. I know I don't think I would have the fuel to keep going. And what keeps me going on this project is the guys, and these guys that are so committed to being better people. Sterling Cuneo is one of our characters. He has a blog, sterlingcuneo.com, I think it is. And his story is just amazing. I mean, he murdered essentially 2 people when he was 16, and he has dissected step by step what took him to taking responsibility for his crime and deciding to change, and then has been able to really dissect what's taken him to that other side. And so I think, to answer your question, Jeff, that's part of it. Is I think everybody's story is worthy of a book or a movie, but who really understands their story and can tell it, understands all the different levels and nuances.
Lydia, in a way, you're a folk hero of our white collar support group, and I've never told you this.
Why is that?
But we have one of our members, who's now owns a recovery center, a part owner of a recovery center, and a brilliant guy. But he was out one night and he drank and got into a car accident, and someone got killed. So he served a little over 7 years in a state prison, hard time. Mm-hmm. And he came out committed to change and to, he's now in school for his doctorate. One of my best friends, a beautiful man, but he walked the Camino.
Oh.
So every once in a while on our support group, he'll come back to it because it was kind of a magical, mystical experience for him.
Yeah.
And then, of course, all the rest of us just get to imagine, because it's the kind of thing where if you're in prison and you're walking circles around the track, that's so far away from what your actual experience is. But yet, internally, mentally, you have to allow yourself to go there. So I saw your movie, but I didn't even know it was you. And so, of course, I contacted him and told him that you're going to be one of the guests. And, he's super interested now. But there's a transformative documentary that really has on the ground effects. It moved people. It moved me. So do you know that while you're doing it? Do you get a sense of the majesty and how people are going to connect to it spiritually somewhere down the line, 5 years later?
Well, I do things. I have a very strong spiritual background. I became licensed as a spiritual practitioner through Reverend Michael Beckwith at the Agape Center, which Will might know. It's in LA. And I start my films backwards. I start thinking about how do I want my audience to feel after they've seen the film? And so with the Camino, I wanted watching the film to be like having a little mini Camino, just watching the film. Because many people, aren't going to go off to Spain. Like the Camino is not for everyone. It is who it's for a lot of people. And so the same thing with Blooming Where Planted is I want the viewers to have that same experience I did. My transformation of like, wow, there's amazing guys in prison. There are like, I'm so inspired by these people. And oh my God, they have to pay, $17 for a video call. I want our audiences to be outraged by, our prison system, how it's so racially unjust and how our prisoners are treated. I'm not going to be focusing on that. There's going to be, but it's really about the transformation that these guys have done in spite of all the obstacles. So I talk about this film is sort of the other side of the coin of the Camino. The Camino is, it's about transformation, and you have all these wonderful people helping you along the way, and these hospitaleros, and everybody's like, oh, here's an apple. Oh, can I rub your feet and treat your blisters? You don't have to pay me. In prison, to me, it's the other side of the coin where, you're getting dragged down. You make a couple steps up, and instead of people supporting you, you have racist, ignorant correctional officers. You have mentally ill prisoners. There's like the threat of violence so often. And so to me, it's even that much more inspiring to see this transformation happen in spite of all those circumstances.
So, go ahead.
One of the things, and I know I haven't yet funded, a passion project like, William or Bill and Lydia. But every project or show I start with, there's a thesis and a pathos that I have to find and identify before I go in as a storyteller. And whether that is taking a look at it from an investigation, from the lens of how this affected a community, how did this happen? How is this preventable? Whatever the question or thesis is, was this homicide justifiable? Sometimes that's a question we have to ask ourselves, you take a look at cases like Alexis Martin and Centoya Brown, where they killed someone who sex trafficked them, and you kind of understand how someone got there, right? You're like, oh, okay, I can see why they did that. And I think everyone has a story to tell. It's just not always the story they think. And I think that's really important when it comes to them wanting to write a book or wanting to have a project made, because there's only 24 hours in a day. There's only so much time people can consume content. And whatever content you watch, you listen to, you absorb, you actually invite into your home and into your life. So, you invited the Camino into your home because it interested you. So what those individuals, if they're like, I really want to write a book, or I really want to do this, they have to think about who that audience is. Who are they catering to? Or is it just they never had their story told and they feel they need to say it? That's what I would say as a storyteller,
And I piggyback on that a little bit and say that I'm sort of, again, reflecting on today and thinking a little bit about the kind of movies that get made about prison, or people who are in prison, after prison, whatever, and everything from looking at it thematically. I think you do start. It always is story. It's about characters. That's at the heart of it all. But then you have to make some practical decisions, and maybe I can talk a little bit about some of that. So I was looking like at the kind of movies that have been successful about prisons. There are the stories about breaking out of prison, like The Great Escape or The Shawshank Redemption, or Prison Break itself, and or Cool Hand Luke, or the conflicts within prison with corrupt people running prisons like The Longest Yard, or people doing time like Birdman of Alcatraz, the Burt Lancaster movie and story of Robert Stroud, or then in other areas, in the nonfiction area, like 13th or The Farm, where you're looking specifically at the conditions in the prison and what led people to be there and how they're treated and what that means for us, reflects upon us as a society. Or Capital Punishment, Long Green Mile, The Life of David Gale. One of the things actually that really hit me very early on was a Robert Redford movie called Brubaker, where he's this progressive type of guy, wants to change the system, and spoiler alert, by the end of the movie, he makes certain character decisions that he's going to put his career aside to expose the fact that they've been murdering and burying people and burying them out in the field without the unmarked gravestones and whatever. And now there are all a series of things about unjust conviction and reversal of convictions, Just Mercy about Brian Stevenson, Clemency about Anthony Woods, or Conviction, the story of Kenneth Waters and his sister Betty Ann, who actually went to law school in order to get the tools to get him released from an unjust conviction about that. So thematically, I think one of the things I think that you start out with, Jeff, with the idea about people telling their stories. I would maybe push back a little bit and say, well, maybe it's not all about you. Really, you need to talk about the people around you and less about your own personal journey, which may or may not resonate with an audience that is going to allow a producer and all of the things that are necessary to get something done to be actually produced. And if you look at that from an audience point of view and what stories are going to resonate with people out in the world, I think that that's a better lens to put on it. The other two other things I just wanted to touch on that are sort of practical, but I think relevant here. One is choosing what kind of storytelling medium you want to choose. I mean, there are documentaries, there's film, there's TV, there's streaming, there's theater, there are online platforms. There are a number of ways that where, particularly the means of production, if you will, online, have never been more accessible. We're also flooded with content as a result of that. So getting outside of the noise and the chatter is one of the big challenges for that. But choosing what's the best way to tell that story, is it a nonfiction or is it fiction, and in what medium? Those are the kind of things I think and producers and storytellers, particularly people who have to raise money and convince investors and networks or studios and distributors and whatever to get actually release what you produce. Those are the kind of things that we're all looking at and saying, well, how do I pitch this? How do I get backers who will actually enable this to get made? And then there's one other thing I just wanted to touch on in the storytelling area, because I think more and more attention is being paid to this. And with our social impact entertainment society, we actually have a person who's the head of impact measurement and assessment. And she was with a company called Participant Media, which is pretty well known in the industry for doing socially minded, impact-oriented type of projects. And so assessing whether you somehow make it all the way through this pipeline, you come up with an idea, you write a script, you get all the actors, you get everything that you need to do, you release it. Did we really move the needle? Did we really have an impact? Because if you are, it's not just about riling people up in the theater or in front of a television screen. It's how do you convert into action? People taking some qualitative or quantitative steps to take the motivation and the passion they received from the story they just witnessed and participated in, and turn that into something real that actually tries to affect positive change in the world. And there are two things that I just want to reference that I think might be interested to people listening to this. One is there's a group I've been on the advisory board for a number of years called Journeys in Film, and it's journeysinfilm.org. And on point here with Just Mercy, they are releasing at Thanksgiving a curriculum guide that will be made for, as all of their guides are, they'll be made available for free online to teachers, students, and anybody else to be able to sort of take, watch a movie and then talk about it, reflect upon it. No, don't just get sort of passionate for 2 hours and then move on to the next thing that captures your attention, but really focus on what can I learn from it? How did I get to be there? What Lydia was saying before about incrementally watching the steps that led to the actual act. So Journeys in Film and this Just Mercy curriculum guide they're about to do, that's one example of, and you'll see there's a whole host of other free curriculum guides that are made available to download for anybody who wants to go online to their website to do that. The other is more in the same vein, which is Abby Disney and her company, they released a documentary called The Armor of Light. It was about gun control, and basically they created a whole series of different type of guides to support that film. And the idea was that they weren't trying to convert the converted. They weren't trying to preach to the choir. What they were doing instead was going to evangelicals, right to life people, and say, well, if you believe, in protecting the sanctity of life, then reasonable gun controls and whatever, to keep things, guns out of the hands of people who are mentally ill or proven to be of bad faith, is inconsistent unless you align those two avowed principles and interests. And so she created a whole series of support materials to go to community churches and ethical, religious, spiritual, and other institutions and support in a series of community screenings for that.
Will you put that in the chat, or will you email that to us? I'm really interested in learning more about that.
Yeah, it's armoroflightfilm.com.
Okay.
And the chat won't come out on the podcast. So
okay, got it.
But what I'll do is I actually put together some notes and I'll send them to all of you as well, and you can use them as you wish. Just as some of my background and reflections that I had leading into this. So in some, because I'm rattling on a little bit here, and forgive me for that, I get very passionate about these things, is that I think a lot of what we do as storytellers, whatever medium we choose and whatever way we tell our stories, I think, at least from my perspective, needs to be intentional and needs to use these very powerful tools that I won't say we have it at our disposal, because we have a lot of masters to please and people to pull in to get behind us and make it all work. But certainly the zeitgeist in which we're involved, or the ecosystem, we need, I think, to use those with greater responsibility. And one final note on that: the Color of Change, working with another group I'm involved with called Hollywood Health and Society, did a recent study earlier this year called Criminal Injustice. And they were talking about representation on the screen and basically, taking minorities, whether, African-American, Latino, Muslims, whatever, and they're always the bad guys, and the cops are always the good guys. And they did this study and it came out just slightly before the Black Lives Matter movement really took to the streets and gained momentum with so many people joining in that. And that study and the force that came behind that, as they really looked analytically and statistically at how people were portrayed as criminals, was one of the through lines that, along with the Black Lives Matter movement, that got the cop show off the air, and there was another one as well, the so-called reality shows.
Like PD?
Yes, exactly. And so that kind of intentionality and whatever is really kind of the service that I see being involved in, and a reason that I am and want to continue being a producer is to be part of that positive social change.
And I think also, you look at these cases, you look at these stories, and sometimes laws get named after these cases or these situations. I think a lot of people, they love stories about, the justice system and just mercy and wrongful convictions. But do people know that there are 13 states that do not have to pay restitution to someone who's wrongfully convicted? That means that you can be in prison for a crime you did not commit for 10, 15, 20 years. And, justice system spits you out, and you have literally nothing. No social security, no retirement, no funding, nothing. And then conversely, on the other side, there are states that do have restitution. It doesn't incentivize the prosecution to revisit some of the cases that maybe their predecessors got wrong, because they don't want to have to pay that money. And so it's just, it's not just that it's a broken system. I say the system's like a sieve, and people are just like falling through all the time. And, people, again, going back to wrongful convictions, I have a friend that spent 16 years behind bars for a murder he didn't commit. And, people are always appalled at the conditions he lived in. Well, they're appalled because he was wrongfully convicted. They're not appalled that there are other people living in that manner.
That's one thing I want to bring up that was pointed out to me that I think is so important, is so frequently the conditions are so inhumane that the prisoners are focused on their treatment and rebelling and being angry about that there's no space for them to reflect on what took them to prison in the first place.
And here's a really good example that's, timely. I don't know if you want to keep this evergreen, but the way that certain prison systems have handled COVID, it's incredible. If schools had handled it the same way that some of the prisons have, where just moving people around that they know have that they've tested positive or they're exhibiting symptoms. So now everyone on the yard is now infected or been exposed to it. If that was a school, right? I'm in LA. If that was a school in Studio City, it would have made the news. It would have outraged people. We would have been like writing to LAUSD or whatever. But it's not. They're for men and women that are 4 or 5 hours away in these desert concrete blocks. They're far from out of sight, out of mind,
So all three of you, the one thing that's resonating for me in your conversations and in the conversations we had before this is the word trust. Because all three of you put things on big screens or out to a lot of people. But in order for that to happen, there had to be a moment of trust between you and the subject, or the moment of where there was real connection, so that you could find the kernel there, the thing that is somehow you're going to be able to transfer to the ultimate listener or viewer, that somehow you're the channel of. And so, Bethany, it strikes me, for example, that you're involved in a lot of current TV shows on Oxygen and CNN and all. But you just demonstrated knowledge of the inner workings of a prison system. That why in the world would you know that? Why would you care? You're sitting in Wales. Why would you know about that? And it's shocking to me. I have to know about it. I lived it. But for you could be on the golf course. You could be doing anything with your lives. but here it is. And the intimacy of that little moment that you share with somebody whose story you're telling, how is it that you know that little tiny thing, that little piece of trust where they trust you, you trust them, how do you get to that? How do you know that that's happening? And then how somehow it will translate to something down the line where someone's sitting in their sofa at home, or they're sitting in a seat in a movie theater or whatever, and they feel that connection too.
Well, oh, go ahead, Bethany.
I think you have to be honest and transparent as a person. And I think without being, this is a very broad stroke thing, but a lot of people in this industry are not the most honest and transparent. And I will joke with certain colleagues, I'll say, imagine like I've been treated better by inmates than by whatever executive, or, and that's a little bit pejorative. That's a little bit of a stretch, but I guess for me, trust and building that relationship with someone, it's like I'm holding their heart in my hands and I'm not going to drop it. Mm. And my reputation is, Bill and Lydia can say, if their film doesn't make the money or doesn't get the viewership, people are not going to be as incentivized to fund their next project, right? Well, conversely, for me, if I do a really bad job with an interview, or I lie, or I'm unethical, well, they're going to go tell their friends that when I go to reach out to them, hey, when Bethany did my interview, she wasn't stand up. And so, funnily enough, this one lady who's incarcerated here in California, she said, it's really funny, Bethany, people don't always love the end result, but they've said you're always the most honest producer they've ever worked with. And it's because the bottom line is something brought those women behind bars, or those men, or, however they identify. And I can't just gloss over that. They might have to sit with their discomfort a little more before they reach what Lydia's described as the transformation, and that's honest storytelling. I can't just be like, yeah, they're a great person. That's a very one-dimensional story. Like, who's going to watch that? People want to see the conflict, whether that's internal, whether that's with the justice system, whether that's with, and, I think conflict builds trust because you see how you relate to that other person in a challenging conversation.
Lydia, you were going to say something?
Yeah. Well, Will and I were talking before we started recording about, I forget, Will, what you had a cute little saying of, quick, what was it?
Oh, too quick doesn't stick.
Too quick doesn't stick. Yeah. Because what's been interesting I've been completely touched by how these guys completely open up and trust me. And I think part of it is it took me 3.5 years to get permission to shoot. And so I was going down to the prison probably once or twice a month. I'd sit in on hospice meetings. there was a class on restorative justice I'd sit in on, all these different things. So the guys kind of got to know me. And there were a couple in particular that I spent significant amount of time with. And so I think that really made a difference. But I do agree, like Bethany said, it's the openness and transparency and, why I'm doing this. And I'm completely open about that. And I think that's important.
Are you in California too? I know Bill and I are.
I am right now, but I live in Oregon, in Portland.
Oh, okay. So, are you more familiar with the California system or the Oregon system?
Oregon system.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So, Will, I'm going to ask you a very pointed question about trust because I know your story so well. And so you're this Midwestern guy becomes a New York lawyer, and you take an interest in Khalil Gibran, and the Prophet's the second most read book in history, and you decide that you want to acquire the rights. I could be confusing this story completely, but somehow you gain the trust of the Gibran family for the rights to the Prophet and to Khalil Gibran's story, his biography. How in the world? You must know that you have some kind of ability, whether to within the duality of trusting and being trusted. You must know that, or believe this is something that you can do. I mean, this doesn't just happen where you're going to get on a plane and fly to Lebanon. I mean, how is it that people trust you that intimately with something that's so personal and so valuable?
Big question. So it's a little bit like Lydia was saying, and I'll back into it this way. I've been teaching a course on negotiation and dispute resolution at Pepperdine Strauss Institute for about a decade. And one of the very first things that I focus on in that course is about relationships. And I could say that, I think all of the world is relational. But in Hollywood, it's relational on steroids. As Bethany said, it's one of these things where you can spend your lifetime building your reputation and lose it very quickly if you do missteps. And we've seen a lot of things in the Me Too movement where people who were in very senior positions, all of a sudden you find out what was going on behind the curtain and whatever. So relationships, I think, are very critical to that. So in this instance, I had a long-standing relationship with a lawyer named Walid Nasser, and he actually lived here in L.A. I had originally hired him for a program I was running for the Motion Picture Association, and he trained in New York and then went and was stationed in Rome, and he managed the Middle East for us. And Walid and I did become very close personal friends in addition to having a business relationship with one another. And basically, after the Civil War had wound down, he moved back to Beirut, and he began to represent the Gibran National Committee of Lebanon. And he actually reached out to me and said, we've had some experiences with people in Hollywood and some people who seemed that they were sort of amateurish. But we've always wanted to find a way to take the Prophet and turn it into a movie. I said, okay, and he said, and would you be interested in helping us to find the path to doing that? And I said, really? I mean, this is 26 prose poems, in a book that, yes, as you said, it's sold over 100 million copies. It's in, probably at least that number of languages around the world. But I don't know how you turn that into a feature film. I mean, certainly inspirational in that medium, but it's like what I was alluding to before is, how do you take something like that in one medium and translate it into a very different one? And so that was back in 2007, I think that started. That time I was actually moving from Austin, Texas to Malibu and kind of resetting myself up in LA and starting, that's a whole other side story as well. But I basically started, some people approached me and we had some connections or whatever. And it's a little bit like what I describe as the last decade or so of my life was just sort of Forrest Gumping my way through it. It's literally one step in front of another and trying to figure out, and a lot of missteps and getting the right people around the table and whatever and figuring out. And we started out thinking we were going to do a biography combined with the Prophet. It's kind of a hybrid sort of movie. And ultimately decided we'd do it as an animation. And we got a wonderful director, Roger Allers, who had done, The Lion King and Aladdin and Beauty and the Beast and a bunch of other things. And we got Salma Hayek to come in, and she she had a whole backstory of her grandfather reading the prophet to her as a child, and that it always resonated with her. And then, she, again, relationally, she started reaching out, and Roger reached out. So, Salma reached out to Liam Neeson, who actually knew the lines of the prophet by heart. So when it came time to go to a recording studio and do the voiceover work for the animation, he wasn't like reading from the script. I mean,
where can we see this?
Yeah, well, it was on Netflix, and it's until the end of September. But I'll make sure I can get how to find it to you. But
Yeah. Oh my goodness.
yeah. But basically, we wound up making an 84-minute animated feature film, and it's actually not off topic with our discussion today, because Al Mustafa, who's the key character in this, who's portrayed by Liam Neeson, he was a political prisoner in Lebanon, and he's supposedly going to be released. By the Turks who have had him in prison for 7 years, and they sort of march him down to the ship that's supposed to take him away. And I won't say more about it because it would spoil some of the plot points. But along the journey, from his imprisoned place out in the mountains of Orphalese, he basically meets up with different villagers and whatever, and different things about different chapters of the prophet are embodied in these fantasy sort of Fantasia-like sequences. So one of the things that I think relates again just to personal motivation with this, that there's something that in one of them on the subject of work, where Gibran wrote, "Work is love made visible," and that's embodied in the storytelling of it as well. So that was kind of I believe, sort of a masterwork that basically took that relation, brought a lot of people together, as often happens, and wound up, coming out the other side of it and being released.
Well, we're starting to get into the end of this podcast. So what I'd like to do is I'd like to go around, and if each of you could just mention some takeaways you'd like the audience to hear from, with the specific part of the audience that you're speaking to people who've been through the justice system, or they're currently in the justice system, or their families, and you represent a vehicle, a way for them to tell their stories, or potentially a way for them to tell their stories, or stories like theirs. So what's the takeaway that people can learn from and grow from here? And also give us your contact information. So Lydia, let's start with you, and then we'll go to Bethany, and then we'll go to Will.
I think what comes to mind is to really start from the inside out, to start working on yourself and attracting to you, rather than going out to look for things. It's really about, working from within and then attracting things to you. I think that's applicable for everything and everywhere. And I think I think that's the most that I can say, because I think it's, everybody does have a story. And I think, like Will said, there's so many different manifestations. And, one of the characters in our film, he's been working on his poetry, his writing, his stuff, he's been working on it as a catharsis, as, for processing what's going on with him. And for my contact information, you can reach me. Our website is caminodocumentary.org, and then you can reach me through that.
Thank you, Lydia. Bethany.
I think one of the big takeaways that I have, I'll give you two. One is actually a passion project I hope to get off the ground, and I'll definitely be pinging you both to get ideas about how I can get funding and the like. When I was on Declassified for CNN, they had wanted to do a piece on a domestic terrorist. And of course, everyone thinks of Ted Kaczynski, and I found a couple more, and I reached out to this young man who was at the Federal Supermax, the Alcatraz of the Rockies. Mm-hmm. And I wrote to him, and I just was like, hey, I don't know what's going to happen, but I'm on this show. We're somewhat interested. And he wrote back, and he'd been raised in the white nationalist movement. And he was like, I don't hold these beliefs anymore. And I was kind of like, oh, okay, here we go. Like, mm-hmm. And we began a dialogue, and he had these racist ideologies that had been placed on him. And while he was in prison, he saw a movie. He saw Sidney Poitier. And he was like, wow, this man is so talented. What if people that I hated are actually artists and talented? And what if my beliefs were wrong? Mm. And it really moved me, because it's the power of story. It's the power of film. It's the power of art, has the chance and has the opportunity to transform someone. And you know, I know it's a long shot, but if Sidney Poitier was listening, I would want him to know, you made a film, 40, 50 years ago, and it changed the life of a young man who was so racist. He had hate tattoos on his face. And he just got out, he was able to successfully argue. And this is a guy that was in with Kaczynski, Eric Robert Rudolph, the 9/11 bombers. And he is so committed to going and telling people about not falling down the same path that he did, and lastly, for one of my Oxygen shows, the mother of a victim had reached out to me long after filming, and she said, I really want to send a letter to one of the defendants who'd killed her daughter. And I said, oh, okay, and I kind of didn't really expect her to follow through, but she called back a few more times. And I said, send me the letter and I'll send it on to him. And it was so powerful for me to witness this moment of forgiveness and reconciliation on both their sides. It really helped me put grace and faith in motion. I could have just been like, the show's done, whatever, but something told me, no, do this. It's the right thing to do. And she was like, I've wanted to do that for years. I never had the chance. And it just, makes me be a little bit more intentional and mindful and considerate about what I do. You can have a compelling story and tell it compassionately too. So
how would people reach you, Bethany?
They can reach me at Bethany at planzproduction.com. And just shoot me an email if anyone needs to get hold of me.
Wonderful. Will?
So in listening, actually, both Lydia and Bethany are inspiring me. I think a lot of this is about building empathy. And how do you build empathy through story and other means that we all have at our disposal? And I think, going back to what you were saying earlier, Jeff, in terms of, why in my approaching mid-70s, am I still doing this kind of work as opposed to buying a sailboat and sort of enjoying going out to Catalina Island or whatever? And I would say it comes back to what I talked about before in terms of sort of purpose-driven life type stuff. I think the empathy part of it is, in my own life story, I spent a summer living in Barcelona, Spain. I was sort of embedded with a family there. I worked in, I I was probably a pretty inept clerk in a Spanish construction company, but I did I did my best, but I lived with that family, and I got to know Spain and what it was like living in another culture and speaking another language all the time because none of them spoke English. And then the summer after that, I was with a group called Operation Crossroads Africa, and we built a school in what was then called Upper Volta, now Burkina Faso. And so it's literally digging ditches in 120 degrees sun, but we were working with counterparts from the school in which we were, this French lycée we were living in there in a place called Bobo Dioulasso. And I think those experiences influenced my feeling about internationalism, my feeling about just learning about other people and kind of walking the walk side by side with others in a way that was way out of my frame of reference from growing up in a very privileged suburb of Chicago. And I think that stuck with me. And, it's like it can't quit me. And so that's sort of with me. And I think that's sort of, the path I will probably remain on as long as I'm physically and mentally able to do this is because of that. And empathy building and learning others' perspectives, I think is one of the critical things, and particularly in today's divided world of politics. I think, that influences everything that we're doing now. And if we as storytellers can play a role in changing that story, I think that would be one of the greatest things we can do. So how you reach me, I've got a website called creativeprojectsgroup.com, and all my contact information and background on what I do and have done this on that site.
Well, thank you to all three of you for being so giving for this hour and sharing so much and making your contact information available to anyone who might want to get in touch with you. One of the things I've learned in doing this podcast is that every show, especially one like this, it makes me a better prison minister. I learn more about what the context is and how people view the people who are in my constituency and how to bring out the best and about empathy. And I think the three of you are just sensational. And thank you for dedicating your precious time and lives to this, because it does take extraordinary people to do that. So I applaud you all and thank you. And I hope you'll stay in touch with one another, because it would be great to have been the catalyst for that. So thank you all.
Thank you, Jeff.
Okay,
Thank you, Beth. Great to meet you guys. Bethany.
Good to meet you. You guys are so inspiring. I'm definitely going to be staying in touch. So
that's great. All right. Goodbye, everybody. Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you for joining us on White Collar Week, sponsored by Progressive Prison Ministries. You can learn more about us on our website, prisonist.org. That's prisonist, like feminist. And please remember to rate, review, and share this podcast so that families suffering in silence can find us if they need us. See you next time.